Welcome, everyone. My name is Shirley, and I will be your moderator this evening. I am excited to welcome Carrie Weber and Matthew Donato as our speakers tonight for a talk on top critical financial decisions to make in 2023 for your dental practice. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to go over some quick housekeeping. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box, and we will answer them live at the end of the presentation. Gary and Matthew, welcome and thank you for being with us tonight. I will pass it over to you now.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for attending this evening's webinar with myself and Carrie. Just a little bit about me. My name is Matthew Donato. As mentioned, I manage and oversee Cirrus Consulting Group's consulting team across all of North America. My predominant role is to work with dentists such as yourselves, specifically in regards to your commercial real estate and long-term planning with that commercial real estate, and make sure that the lease agreement and your portfolio is best lined up to work for you. And I'm also joined, as mentioned, by Carrie Weber from Jameson Management.
Thanks, Matt. It's so great to be with you, and thanks to Shirley and the Henry Schein team for hosting this event with us. I am the owner of the Jameson Group. We are a business and hygiene consulting firm and dental marketing firm, and we help dentists and teams across the country in the United States to find a way to be more productive, more profitable, and ultimately more fulfilled in their practices and in their careers. So I'm thrilled to be here to talk about how we can help our practices become more profitable through looking at the operations and the overhead that you're investing in every single day. So Matt, I'm going to give it back to you to kick things off.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Carrie. So really, what is the purpose of today's webinar? So I'm just going to do a couple of housekeeping items as well, just walk everybody through why we're all here on a Wednesday evening. I'll give you a little bit more information about us, and then we'll go through some of the key topics. So really what we're going to walk through tonight, as Carrie had mentioned, how can we make smarter financial decisions moving forward? Not only from a practice perspective, but also looking at some of the external factors that sometimes we feel that we don't know what to do with them, and we feel like we have no control over. And, if I had a dollar for every time that I heard a dentist say, well, Matt, I can't negotiate my lease rate, I'm just a dentist, right? I would be a multi-millionaire. Unfortunately, that's not the way that it works, but, there certainly are aspects that we can touch on and will touch on today. But, we're going to go through protecting the profit, purchasing versus leasing commercial real estate. What's best for you now? Also, we'll take a little bit of a look at what's best for you in the future, right? How do you choose the right size for the practice? That's going to be some of what Carrie is going to speak on, as well as myself. And then we're going to also go through, should we expand? Should we renovate? Do we need to relocate, right? Also looking at, can I save now through refinancing or through lease negotiations? Looking at some of the top negotiation tips and tricks, and also ensuring that everybody's taking a bit of an inward look at their dental practice as well, identifying some of these red flags and not just going, okay, well, that's an issue, but really getting some tangible feedback on how we can fix a lot of these problems as well, right? Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with myself and Cirrus Consulting Group, this is just a little bit about us, who we are, what we do, and why I'm able to give today's presentation alongside Carrie. So we're a healthcare and dental specialized tenant representation firm. We're founded by healthcare professionals nearly 30 years ago. And to date, we've negotiated over 13,000 actual dental office lease negotiations. But really what makes us so unique is that everything for us is done in-house. Right? So we have a full team of lease negotiators and attorneys on staff, some of which who have been with us now for over 20 years, as well as some of those that we took from the major national landlord side. So I always joke that we brought them from the dark side to negotiate for dentists rather than against them. Right? Now, annually, we represent over 500 doctors throughout North America. We deliver over 100 of these continuing education courses, but we work with dentists, doctors, medical professionals nationwide. Now, what I'm going to kick everybody off with, and this is something that we all think about, is the rental rates. What does the market look like? How is it affecting us? Now, I do have to put a little disclaimer here. I'm going to show some forward projections of market rates, rental rates, trends, etc. But this is based off of very highly analytical software. It's not the crystal ball. I wish I had it, but this is as good as it gets in terms of forward projections. But it's not. It can't be 100% true because there's 1,000 different things that can happen between now and 3 years from now. But really what you're going to see here is a fairly common trend. So I'm going to go through a couple major metropolitan areas, but if we look at Atlanta, we look at Houston, you can see a fairly similar fluctuation in terms of markets and vacancy rates. So when we're talking about the vacancy rates, that's your orange line there, your market rates, that's your blue line. So as we all experienced the world in 2020, that's where you can see that little drop. In Atlanta, not as much as you can see here in Houston, but the rental rates have been on a steady increase. Now, what you can see both along these lines, once you reach 2024, is there is a reduction predicted in the rental rates. Now, you may be asking yourself, why? What could that possibly be? Well, if you look back at 2020, 2019, and now looking forward and going, okay, well, everybody's working from home. Where is everybody in the building? Where are these retail spaces that used to be full? Well, you can see a shift in the market rates, presumably because people that signed 5-year leases or 10-year leases prior to the pandemic, shutdowns or otherwise, and now have worked from home, their leases are coming due. And therefore, landlords are going to have a surplus of space. And that's also why you can see the vacancy rates are starting to increase. What that means is it's a great time to start getting locked in at these rental rates. Now, once again, if we look here, New York, Boston, very similar trends. You can see it's gone through a steady decline in Boston. Same with New York. They were hit very hard through the 2020, 2021, and they haven't quite got back to norm, but it is projected to go even further downward. Same with LA, same for San Francisco, right? For any of you on this evening's webinar that are in the Bay Area, I'm sure you know that San Francisco now is a ghost town, right? Where it used to be, you wanted to have that prime office space dental practice because you had everybody in that office tower. It's not the same there anymore, right? And you can really see some of the vacancies going up, right? Today, we're dealing with almost 20% vacancy rate in San Francisco alone. And that is going to go up to presumably 30% by 2026, just in 3 more years. All right. So if your area comes up on here, feel free to take a screenshot. But we do have additional software where we can look very specifically some submarkets, etc. But similar things here. Miami is really the only one alongside Orlando that instead of going down, it's looking at actually going to an upward trajectory. Now, the inverse there is that for those that are in that market, it's important to ensure that you're not on this ever-increasing roller coaster where your rent only goes up. And hopefully for the landlord, it doesn't come back down. Hopefully for you, we get to come back down again as well. All right. So on that note, when we're looking at rental rates, when we're looking at those effects, we really want to take a look at cost reduction, right? How do we reduce some of these costs? And part of that is maximizing your leverage as a tenant, right? Now, dentists, unfortunately, like I said earlier, that you feel that you don't have leverage through your negotiations, which is absolutely incorrect. And now more than ever is that wrong. You are the best tenant on the face of the earth. You are in the space longer than anybody else. Your build-out costs are higher than anybody else. And ultimately, that increases the value of the property for a landlord. So put yourself in the landlord's shoes. Do the math. What is the total tenancy expense over the next 10, 20 years? What does that look like, right? Plan, prioritize, make sure, a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, we can't just look at it in a vacuum and go, okay, well, this is what I need to do for this year. And that's it. I'm not going to think about year 2. We have to think a couple steps ahead. And, it is a good time right now to have your cake and eat it too. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is getting predictable costs moving forward through your rental rates, right? Unfortunately, what a lot of landlords are doing to their tenants without them knowing or without realizing is they're actually putting the rental rate increases on CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, right? Now, I had a doctor that was on CPI and his rental rate rose by 8.23% from last year to this year, right? So not an increase in costs that we want to be dealing with. And it is one of those components that we have to go in eyes wide open and know what we're dealing with here. Now, the other component is now might actually be the time to relocate. Maybe you're outgrowing the space. Maybe you're in a situation where, the building is getting old. We need to relocate, whatever the case may be. But if we've been thinking about it for a while, the inducements that a lot of landlords are providing to tenants, specifically dental tenants, to relocate from space A to space B or from another building to theirs is immense. And I'll go through a couple examples that I have here. But keep in mind that you are a great tenant, and now more than ever is a time to make sure that you are that new anchor tenant, so to speak, for the landlord. Now, looking at the financial negotiables, right? I just gave a couple examples there, but for those of you, if you want to take a quick picture, take a screenshot of this, these are the 7 key negotiables in your lease agreement, right? Now, most of us find ourselves sitting right around base rent and going, well, I need my base rent to be lower, and we don't look at anything else beyond that, right? Now, whether that is some of you that may be starting your first practice, maybe you're looking at relocating, or you're just looking at renewing the space, right? The base rent, albeit very important, is not the be-all and end-all of those financial negotiations, right? You have other things like the annual increase. Like I just said, I've had some clients as of late that have been dealing with annual increases based off of CPI, 8% and upward. Now, if we can get that 8% down to 3% over a 5, 10, 15-year period, right, you could be looking at saving $25,000, $35,000, $45,000 just from decreasing the actual increases, right? Never mind being able to also supplement that with lower base rents, right? Other aspects is the common area maintenance. Any of you that have your spaces and all of a sudden at the end of the year, you get a reconciliation statement from the landlord saying, oh, hey, Dr. Weber, you actually owe me another $35,000 this year because I did X, Y, and Z, and what you paid me already wasn't enough, right? Having a $35,000 bill come out of thin air at year end is not palatable, not to anybody, right? So making sure that whatever the landlord is passing along to you is fair, but also making sure that your rates are changing because of the increased vacancies in your location. Can't tell you how many different doctors I've spoken to that their increases in their common area maintenance fees were actually due to the fact that the landlord could not fill the space. So they were actually only 50% full, and the landlord had taken the 50% from the other half of the space that was vacant and tacked all of that onto the existing tenants, right? So effectively, you're dealing with a situation where you're paying for what you should, right? Fixturing periods, free rents, tenant improvements, landlord work. These are all components that the landlord will and can give to you, so long as you ask properly and so long as you know what they all mean and how to actually work with them, right? But if you need to update your space, you need to outfit your space, some of these mechanisms here are key to doing so. Now, as I said, looking at some of the case studies that we've had over the years, and this one was actually from last year, and we finalized it in February. But this is a doctor, they're in Long Beach, they're in the middle of their career. They originally came to us to renew the lease. Now, what we uncovered during that process was that the landlord actually was going to be planning on demolishing the building. Now imagine you're ready, you're going, okay, great, I'm ready to renew, I want to extend, I'm going to be here for the next 20 years. And the landlord turns around and goes, I'll renew you for a short term, or you can get out. That's it. And that's unfortunately what occurred with this doctor. So it was either we were going to renew for the time being and move in the future, or get it all out of the way now. Well, the doctor decided that they were going to be renegotiating it and relocating the practice. We negotiated a short-term extension, so there was no downtime. for the practice. But this is what ended up occurring. The landlord for the new build out actually was willing to contribute $153,340 to that build out, right? So that was money that now, if you see their practice, it's absolutely stunning. It's gorgeous, but they had moved to a better space with more visibility. This landlord was dying to have somebody come in, especially a dentist, gave them, $150,000. And then on top of that, we were also able to secure nearly another $50,000 worth of free rent. So that's additional savings for them to get their feet under them and get rid of some of the initial burden. With that, we were able to get a 10-year term with 2 5-year options for an 1,800 square foot space, right? So like I said, if we are looking at relocating, we're looking at moving, it is a possibility, but you have to be smart about it. You have to know how to ask the right questions, and don't just relocate for the sake of relocating, right? But what I love to do with situations like this is let's take a look at all options, right? It's not just option A, option B, and we'll make those decisions separately. It's let's look at both simultaneously and make sure we're able to make the most educated decision as we move through. Right now, this is another case where the landlord, this was actually this year as well, as one of my associates, they had a doctor that the landlord was turning around and expecting an 11% increase on rent. Now, this was because the doctor was getting a very good deal for quite some time, and their lease was coming up for expiry. But the landlord just turned around and said, either you're renewing with me for 11% increase on rent or you're getting out of the space. Now, thankfully, we're able to actually negotiate the expiring rent to stay the same for year one and only increase it 3% year on year thereafter. So over just the initial 5 years, we were also able to get an additional 5 years at another fixed increase. We're able to save $37,937 in the initial 5 years. And then for the secondary 5 years there, we're looking at saving another $41,000 plus keeping the 2x5 options to renew. Right. So once again, guys, when I say that you don't just have to take the landlord's word at face value and go, okay, we're going to renew for this and that's it. You don't have to. It is possible to go through these things and go through these negotiations and get lower rates. And now there's another doctor in New York. What we're able to do for this gentleman was we were able to relocate the practice once again, right? The landlord ended up building out the practice completely, and for over $250,000, we were able to get another $3,600 of free rent, right? So just some examples to show what is possible out there. Now, when we're looking at profitable growth, right? We're looking at how can we ensure that not only are we set up to continue to make money and continue to operate a profitable practice, but what many of us don't think about is that the lease is also just as important to some of the things that we can or cannot do within the space. Now, one of those is the use provision. Now, the use provision, as you can see here, I just include a little screenshot, states that the tenant shall use the premises solely for the purpose of operating a dental office and for no other purpose whatsoever. Now, to all of us, we understand dentistry, right? We understand that a dental office is an all-encompassing broad scope of services that you're able to provide. However, when you're dealing with landlords, they don't know that. When they're looking at dental office, they're thinking crown and bridge, hygiene, and that's it, typically. So just a couple bullet points here. What services are you providing? Are you bringing in specialists? And are there exclusivities in the property? Right? I had a doctor that had an orthodontist already in his building when he moved in, and he was a general dentist. He wanted to provide orthodontics, but the orthodontist already had the exclusivity. He couldn't do it. Now, on the flip side of that, the use provision, once again, being very important, is I had a doctor that was a general dentist, moved into a strip mall plaza, had been there for about 5 to 7 years at that point, and was providing a great deal of orthodontic work. Her use provision was a dental office and for no other purpose. What happened was an orthodontist negotiated with the landlord to pay an extra 13% in rent for an exclusivity over ortho and ortho-related services. What that meant was the day that that orthodontic practice opened for business, the general dentist received a cease and desist order for all ortho and ortho-related services. Unfortunately for her, that was nearly $120,000 worth of production that was wiped out from underneath her, completely outside of her control. So why I say, look at the use provision, take a look at what we're dealing with, because it is extremely important to know, are we able to provide these services at all? Are we impeding on other people's exclusivities? Do you have an exclusivity yourself? That's a key as well. Now, another point here too is associates, specialists, and subtenants. And I'm just going to leave you with the 1099 versus W-2. So for any of you that may have an associate today, may be thinking about adding an associate in the future, and you're thinking about doing it that on a 1099 basis rather than a W-2, do you know what effect that has on the lease? A 1099, by all intents and purposes, to a landlord is a subtenant, because you now have a separate entity coming into the space, directly generating revenue off of the location, versus a W-2 who's just an employee of the practice. So when you're looking at the 1099, right, make sure that you know whether or not you're allowed to even have them in there. I had a doctor, they had an associate, landlord found out from the website, put them in default of the lease for an unapproved subtenant, and the cure for the default was 200% of rent. Right. So if we're looking at making the practice bigger, we're looking at ways and other avenues to grow and to add revenue sources, and whether it's a specialist, an associate, what have you, we're looking at adding it, make sure that the lease that you have allows for that to happen. And if it doesn't, you can make it so, but don't just go through adding associates and 1099s without knowing that first, because it can be quite costly on the back end. Now, just for those, I know I saw some through the registration that were looking at buying their own real estate or already own their own real estate. This is just for those that are considering. I always like to leave this up. Just take a quick screenshot of this, just giving you a bit of a comparison here of the pros and cons, where the investments come in, right? Obviously, when you're buying real estate and building out a dental practice, it's much more expensive versus if you're leasing, you don't have that upfront cost of buying property, but you do have that upfront cost of building it, right? So just this and the next slide there, just to take a quick screenshot of, these are just some questions to think about, such as, when you actually own your space, do you have a lease agreement, right? What does that look like, right? And how is that transferable in the future? For those of you that are leasing, this is another great one for you as well. And I know some of you actually filled out this questionnaire through your registration, but know when your lease expires, know if your options are transferable, know when you want to transition, because if you can't have that drawn out and you don't know, hey, I want to practice for 20 years, but I only have 10 years worth of term, well, what does that mean? Or I only want to practice for another 3 years and I have 5 years worth of term left on the lease. Okay, great, no problem. Except an incoming buyer is going to need options. They're going to need term to make that exit profitable for you, right? Most financial institutions won't grant a loan if there's not 10 years or more of term on the back end for them to take over to amortize that loan out. And speaking of those profitable transitions, right? When you're looking at transition planning, when you're looking at making sure that we've ramped up the production of the practice, it's as profitable as it can be, it's going to be as valuable as it can be through the sale of the practice. These are just a couple of the components that can actually devalue the practice valuation. The assignment section, which we'll go through momentarily, the rental rate increases, right? If I want to buy your practice and your practice is producing $850,000 and Carrie's practice is producing $850,000, but Carrie's rent is $50,000 a year less than yours, and we're right next door, well, which practice am I going to go for, right? So know how your rents fare in the market, right? Consideration language, making sure that landlords can't come after proceeds of sale, making sure that you know whether or not you're going to remain continually liable, right? All of those aspects need to be thought of as you go through, because also things like death and disability. If, God forbid, something is to happen to you, whether it's a physical injury or mental incapacitation, or worst case scenario, to pass away, what happens to the practice? Whose liability is that? Typically, the way lease agreements are written is that it's binding to all successors and heirs. So if you, God forbid, something's to happen to you, your family, your estate, etc., are now liable. Now, this is another one, I'm not going to go through every single one of these clauses, don't you worry, but this is just a number of provisions that can be found within the lease that can all affect the valuation and the profitability of the practice, right? I could go through every single one, but I don't want to bore anyone to death. But another one, just a quick screenshot there will greatly help. So looking at the assignment section, right? This is an assignment section, right? And I know many of you, when I show clients this, or I do some of my Zoom calls with people to go through their lease agreements, I show them the assignment section. They just go, okay, well, that's big. I don't want to deal with it. And I agree. But why this is so important is this is the section that quite literally dictates how you sell your practice and what the landlord's involvement in that process looks like, right? And through this section, right, you must have the landlord's consent to sell the practice. The landlord has the option to approve, decline, or terminate your lease agreement. They also have the ability to increase your rental rates for just asking to sell the practice and assign the lease, right? Carrie's about to buy my practice, but all of a sudden, when she signs that dotted line, my rent go up by 15%. Well, what's Carrie's reaction to that acquisition going to be? Typically, most lose interest and walk away. Or two, Carrie turns around and goes, yeah, okay, Matt, I'll buy your practice, but you need to take $200,000 off the asking price in order for me to proceed with this. And that's a very real example that occurred with a client of mine. Now, this here as well is that if you receive any income, cash, or consideration from the sale of the practice, you must pay that to the landlord on 30 days notice. So just for selling the practice and having the lease, the landlord gets to turn around and say, well, thanks for being a great tenant for me, Carrie. How much did you make off that? Okay. So you owe me $750,000 for that sale. Thank you very much. And because you've signed this agreement, you've agreed to that already, right? If we're looking at making sure our exits are smooth and profitable, having somebody else put their fingers in the cookie jar and take away how our transition, how our practice is sold, and then take away from our retirement is terrible, especially when they also get to state that even if I do let that all happen, you're still going to remain continually liable on my lease. So if I go in default of the lease and my buyer, and the person I bought the practice from doesn't know, the landlord still has the ability to go after the original owner, right? So just in this section alone, this is found in 75% of leases. All of those red flags are within this assignment and subletting section. And I read through one today that unfortunately was exactly like this. And the doctor's planning on practicing only for another year and a half, right? So make sure that these things are thought out first and that everything is set up properly, not only for your profitability today, but also for the profitability in your future, right? Look at this. The cost of this mistake could be $200,000, $500,000 at least, right? And well, like I said earlier, when we're looking at the strategies, we're looking at where this all fits in. How are we going to do all this, right? Start as early as possible. Don't wait to the 8-month, the 3-month period to say, okay, I need to get all this done, because the leverage for you starts to dwindle. Now, it's not to say that 8 months is too late, but start early, start often. It gives you a lot more ability to plan and get through everything accordingly. So as a courtesy here to everybody on this evening's webinar, before I take too much of Carrie's time as well, we have another service that's called a critical dates and risk analysis. Effectively, it's a lease consultation. So this is a $2,000 value where myself and my team We'll spend 3 to 4 hours analyzing your lease agreement for traps, if applicable, right? You may have the best lease ever and there's nothing we can do, but we'll go through all of that. We'll go through your vision, your plan, what the traps are, what that means to you and your vision, your goals, etc., what the ideal lease agreement should look like for you, and how to effectively negotiate that, really a tactical plan, right? So like I said, that's typically a $2,000 value, but as a courtesy to everybody attending this evening, we'll be doing that completely complimentary. If you are interested, all you have to do is shoot me an email, give me a call, but I'll pass it over to Carrie. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Matt. And as I start to share my screen, my gosh, I don't know about you all, but I'm not scared. Okay, maybe I'm a little scared. I mean, that is pretty phenomenal information. And, it's really important information when the co-presenter is over here taking notes and screenshots of Matt's presentation. So, Matt, that was great. Thank you so much. And my hope is that I can piggyback on what Matt is sharing, because what we're talking about today is how to help you become, financially freer, right? We're really looking to how you can become more profitable in your practice. And so what I want us to think about is how we're putting on our hats of being your own chief operating officer, truly. Is, Matt's given you a very, a sliver of focus when it comes to your facility and where there are so many gaps. What did you say that you look for, Matt, when you're doing the complementary risk analysis? You're looking for?
We're looking for all the red flags and making sure that you're fully protected, but specifically to your prerogative. Right? Not everybody's lease agreement looks the same. It's much like a patient's mouth, right? You don't look at the same. They don't look the same. They need to be made for you. They don't just work for everybody.
Absolutely. And so to have someone with that kind of expertise looking for the gaps, and looking for the things that you didn't see. And it's only natural that there may be things that you don't see. So, we're talking about how to make good financial decisions for 2023. Well, guess what, my friends? There's only 4.5 months left in 2023. So what we're really doing is preparing yourself as we come into the final lap of 2023 of how you're going to really stretch your wings financially in 2024. That's ultimately the steps that you're going to be taking now to help you for your future years. Interestingly, as I kick things off on my part of the presentation, I wanted to share some pretty staggering reports from the American Dental Association's Health Policy Institute. They're reporting based upon the practices that they have surveyed and had results from a 7% decrease in net income for general dentists in private practice. And while the good news is there's a 2.2% increase in practice revenues, the bad news is there's a 7.7% increase in practice expenses, not to mention a 4.5% increase in hours worked in the practices. So what does that mean? The surveys are saying that 38% of general dentists are reporting they were too busy to treat all people requesting appointments and or were overworked. So sorry, I guess I'm not giving you any good news on these parts, because really the takeaway is that your expenses are rising faster than your revenues. Hence the need to go have a lease conversation with Matt and his team. Because what's happening is, if you've heard the old saying, the phrase, working smarter, not harder. Well, the bad news is, based upon those results, is it sounds like a lot of practices are working harder, not smarter. And so I want you to take a step back for the remainder of our time together, a few minutes, and look at yourself, your practice, your numbers from an operations person's standpoint of what is happening in my practice. Where are the gaps? Just like there are going to be gaps in your your leases, most likely, there are potential gaps happening in your practice. And I want to tell you something very clearly, while we at Jameson, we work with dental practices all over the country. And our goal is always to help you become more efficient, to streamline your practice systems and your processes, to level up your verbal skills and your team's ability to execute their roles in the systems. But in the end, efficiency is not always the same as effectiveness. And what we need to remember is, yes, it's great to be efficient, but if we're creating cracks in our systems and in our practice and in our operations, the likelihood is we're becoming less effective. And that's what those surveys are telling us. So let's talk about profit margin. How can you in your practice increase profit? Well, there are 3 ways. Number 1, we can increase our production. We can increase our fees, number 2, or we can decrease our costs. So it seems very simple, but in the end, what we're looking at here is, how can I become more productive, but also more profitable, right? So what happens often is we think we're being very productive because we're very busy. Well, busyness is not the same as being productive. Busyness does not mean you're being productive. Often what you see in those survey results from the ADA, when doctors are saying they're feeling overworked, they can't even see all the patients that they want, and yet their costs are going up and they are making less. That is the story that we're hearing, which is why we want to look at the operations of our practices and inspect what we expect. Where are the opportunities? Where are the golden eggs in our practices, so to speak, that can help us increase our profit margin? Because I know that all of you are under a great deal of stress in a lot of ways when it comes to, financially. If you're in network with insurance plans, the write-offs are starting to really cause a great deal of pain when it comes to, you're not collecting what you're producing, and yet you're working so hard, like you're on a treadmill, to make what you are, to see as many patients as possible so that you can collect enough to keep the doors open and pay yourselves. Employee salaries are increasing. We are in a phase, in a season where employee salaries have gone up exponentially. So how are we going to offset that? How are we setting the standards with our teams, making sure we're hiring high-performing team, training them appropriately so that they can, in return, bring a return on investment of paying these high levels of salaries? So I want you to look at a few things in your practice. I want you to check in on these things, your production and your collections. Ultimately, we want to be collecting what we produce. My mother, Jameson's founder, Kathy Jameson, wrote a book called Collect What You Produce. So what's important is that we look at what's the gap here. And if there's a big gap, what's the most painful experience you can have as a practice is hitting your production goals and then realize that your collections are 50% of that. And so we want to take a look at that and what's causing that. You'll see down on the line the dental benefits in your insurance plans. If you are in, as Lois Banta would say, if you're in relationship with dental benefits plans, dental insurance companies, it's important that you are auditing your own plans to see how many patients do you have in those plans, what are the write-offs, what treatment's being accepted, and so on, so that you understand what you are in agreement with. If you want to be in network with a bazillion plans, that's your prerogative. But I want you to understand the rules of the game that you are agreeing to. Just like Matt is saying, I want you to understand what your lease is allowing you to do or what it's not allowing you to do, so that we're all playing the same game with the same rules and understand what we're all agreeing to here. I want you to look at your hygiene production and your hygiene retention. A lot of times we think we're super, super busy in hygiene, but we're not producing nearly what we could or should be, or we're not running our hygiene appointments as effectively. Remember, efficiency and effectiveness are not always the same, that we are doing those with intention. Just like as Matt had said earlier, the intentionality behind what you're agreeing to, being intentional in those conversations, makes such a big difference. So I want you to think about the intention behind your patients' experiences in the hygiene department. And retention is a big thing. If you start having, hygiene appointments fall behind 30, 60, 90 days, the longer a patient does not does not get that next continuing care appointment, the higher the likelihood is that they're going to continue all the way to becoming inactive. Most of the dashboard systems that you have readily available to you, from Jasper to Dental Intel and so on, those all are usually measuring an active patient as being a patient that has been in your practice in the last 18 months. So we want to make sure we have a great hygiene retention program in place. Your case presentation and treatment acceptance rates. Now, at Jameson, we're always wanting practices to strive to hit 80 to 85% treatment acceptance. What we are finding from industry leaders is they are saying that the mainstream dental practice is averaging a 35% treatment acceptance rate, which is a big difference in numbers. So I want to encourage you to determine what treatment have you presented, what's been accepted, what's been completed, what's scheduled. Measure those numbers and see, is there an opportunity in how we're presenting treatment to our patients to improve our treatment acceptance numbers, which will in turn increase our productivity, which in turn will help us to become more profitable and grow our practice from within with the patients that we have in our practice. Your fees. If you have not had your fees reviewed to see if you are even within the realm of averages of fees in your area, I would highly encourage you to do so. Expenses are going up everywhere, including in your practice. So if your fees do not reflect the cost in which it takes you to provide the level of treatment and quality of care that is expected by your patients in your practice, I would encourage you to have a fee analysis done. And looking at your overhead, from your salaries to your to all of your the things that you have in your practice, how you're ordering your everything that you need, all of those costs. What does it cost for you to keep the doors open, to keep your team paid, to hopefully pay yourself? It's important that we have our overhead numbers in check and that we're reviewing that on a regular basis. My husband, Jess, who owns Jameson with me, is always saying, make sure they have their finger on the pulse of cash flow, the money that's going in versus the money that's going out. And for a lot of you, if you're a young dentist, another thing you need to be keeping the finger on the pulse of, if you're a young dentist or if you're a dentist that's purchased a new location or you've made really big investments, your debt service is just as important of a piece for you to be keeping an eye on as everything else. You need to be setting production, collection, performance goals based upon what it is you ultimately want and need to be getting from your practice. So let me tell you about a few case studies of our own that looks at some of these numbers that I'm talking about, honing in on where are we needing to refine or focus our energy? What do we want to see different? Let's attack this area of the practice, this system, this approach, and let's set some goals specifically. Let's train to this. Let's establish new processes for this, and let's be intentional in changing the way things are done. That's what we're going to talk about here. Number one, a single doctor practice in Oklahoma. This is actually a practice that I partner in ownership with the doctor. We help to manage her practice with her. And this was a heavily insured practice that has now eliminated all insurance plans except for one as of the end of year of 2022. From January to today, they have produced 80,000 more and collected 80,000 more compared to previous years, and they have seen over 100 fewer patients. So let that sink in. They are making more, they are collecting more, they are seeing fewer. Jameson's model of success is see fewer patients in a day, do more dentistry per patient when and where appropriate, see patients for fewer appointments, maximize a minimal team. I'm not saying go fire all your team. I'm saying make the most of the team you have, maximize their talents and their places in the practice, share in the rewards of work well done, continuously to develop and improve your systems. That is the model of success. And this practice is striving to do that. And it's starting to reflect to a point that sometimes they're like, oh, we have openings in our schedule. And yet we've already met our production. We're exceeding our production goals. And so it's a very confusing place to be. Now they get to invest because they're financially becoming more stable. They get to invest in external marketing to help attract more of the types of patients that they're wanting to see, that want the dentistry that this doctor wants to do. Next case study. This practice started focusing on their case presentation systems and their hygiene retention. It's a 3-doctor practice in Wisconsin. And in a year, they saw a treatment acceptance increase of 43% and a hygiene retention increase of 24%, leading to over $250,000 increase in production and collections. It's actually much more than that. I just went with a common number. And that is by focusing on specific systems and identifying people in their team, treatment coordinator, hygiene retention coordinator, giving people the skills, getting a process in place that's very intentional in these areas of the practice that they wanted to see a positive result. And boy, I'd say they got it. The next one, 2-doctor practice, Ohio. In 1 year, a 60% increase in production and a $60,000 increase in production, $60,000 increase in collections, simply by increasing their fees and focusing on hygiene retention. So what I'm saying is there are opportunities in your practice if you're willing to change for the better, refine your systems, look at specific areas that might need to be elevated, changed, eliminated, increased, have a resource to come negotiate it. There are opportunities if you will take the time as your own chief operating officer to look for those opportunities and make some changes happen. So I want you to choose your focus. What are you going to focus on that you need the most? What needs to be improved? What needs to be tweaked? What needs to be outsourced? What needs to be eliminated? What needs to be added? What needs to be negotiated? I guarantee something has come to your mind in the last 45 minutes of something you need to do, a decision you need to make, a training you need to have, a company you need to reach out to, something you need to take out of your life or out of your practice, something you need to add to your practice. I don't know what it is, only you can know, but I guarantee if you make that decision, the big decisions are going to get you the effective change that you're looking for. And that's what a great leader is going to do. You're going to do your due diligence, investigate and inspect what you expect out of your practice, and then make the decisions necessary to help you move forward to what your ideal vision is for your practice. As Matt said earlier, it's really about what's right for you, not what's right for your neighbor, not what's right for the person in the town next to you. For you, your practice, and your vision of how you want to practice, to make sure that you're in agreement, or you have all the resources and tools and the places and the spaces that you need to be as successful as you can be in your vision for your practice. Do you have systems in place? Let me tell you, I got doctors every week that are accidentally successful. I mean, they are successful in spite of themselves. So that's what tells me there is so much opportunity for you to thrive in your practice if you will give yourself structure in order to be successful, and give your team the structure to be successful. So do you have systems in place? Does your team execute them effectively? If you're saying, oh, Carrie, I don't know what you mean by systems. Well, let's figure out what the systems are and let's work on those. Do you nurture team engagement and set measurable goals for your team? Goals are important, and encouraging a culture of high performance is also important. Gallup surveys are saying that 60% of the worldwide workforce considers themselves quiet quitting. Now, what quiet quitting is what we've called for years disengagement. You have team that are showing up, but not really showing up, if you know what I mean. And when you have underperforming team and team members that are like phoning it in, how are you ever going to be as productive and as profitable as you can or need to be? So we have to create, as leaders, a culture that encourages and expects high performance in our teams. And it takes a culture that makes them, that motivates them to want to do that. So inspecting what you expect. Here are some resources to help. I mean, I know that was a short, down and dirty presentation that leaves you with, what do I do with this information? Here's what you do. If you have never had, because this is a Henry Schein webinar, I think it's important to say, if you are a Henry Schein customer and you've never had a practice analysis, you should absolutely reach out to your Henry Schein representative and discuss what that is and how to receive one of those. They can pull opportunities from your practice information that's going to be very enlightening to you, including a fee analysis. So remember what I said earlier about fee analysis? Go ahead and get yourself a Henry Schein practice analysis. Matt talked about the lease review, such an incredibly valuable gift that he is giving you. And I was really starting to sweat when he was presenting, because I have lived through some of those scenarios that Matt talked about, being limited in the services that you can provide because of limitations from another tenant to what your practice can and cannot do. The negotiations of increases in the lease that have caused a practice purchase to go kaput when it was so close to happening. These are very real scenarios that I would encourage you to talk to Matt and have a person on this team do this lease review with you. What a valuable gift. And then from Jameson, my husband, Jess, our CEO, has offered to do a virtual office assessment for you. He would pull data, he would have conversations with you and your team, and would evaluate opportunities in your practice, the gaps from a practice management and marketing standpoint, that if you focused your energy, the results that could come from making tweaks, changes, or implementation in a different way. So I want to encourage you to look into any of these resources. Now, another thing for you all to get things started, go ahead and open up your phones if you can and grab this with your camera. This is an ebook that I'd like to offer to you from Jameson that has a specific exercise in it that I want you to take. It's called a Rate Your Practice exercise, and it lists 25 of some of the integral systems in your practice. Not all of them, but some of 25 of them that you can rate yourself 1 to 10 and get really real with yourself about how are we doing here. And if you want to be really bold and really build culture, let your team do this Rate Your Practice exercise with you and see what your averages are. 7 or higher, you can celebrate and pat yourself on the back. The ones you rank yourself lower, maybe that's the opportunity that's going to help you become more productive in 2024. So do the Rate Your Practice exercise. I encourage you to do that. It also gives you some information, some other resources to help you lead your practice forward. We want to set those goals, create strategy of what we're going to do once we discover what we're going to work on. We're going to assign people responsible for the steps that we need to take. We're going to assign deadlines of when we're going to do these steps. And then we're going to evaluate by having really great team meetings, everybody. We're going to evaluate our progress of how we're doing. So here's a goal for you, a clear, defined goal. I am going to work with Cirrus Consulting to have a lease negotiate or have my lease reviewed and determine if I need to do any negotiations in the upcoming renewal of my lease. The first step, you're going to reach out to Matt and his team and you're going to get the free lease review. And then who's going to do that? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be your office manager? Is it going to be another member of your team that's going to get that scheduled? By when? By next week? I don't know. By whatever Matt says. By when? And then in the next team meeting or next month, you're going to evaluate, okay, what did I get from that? What do I know now? What am I going to do with that information? So as you can see, this type of action planning and goal setting offsets procrastination and it encourages momentum. And that's what I want for you, is for momentum to take place. So my question for you is, Are you busy being busy, or are you being productive? And those are the questions I want you to ask yourself and determine, what can I do in the next 4.5 months to help increase the profitability of my practice and set me up for a strong 2024? Matt, anything that you want to add as we come to a close on that?
No, I have nothing to add other than I've had a few of my clients just within the past year or so that have worked with you, or I've spoken to that have worked with you in the past, and every single one of them said that it's an absolutely invaluable service. I encourage everybody that take the opportunity, speak with Carrie, speak with Jameson, speak with their husband. They're going to take good care of you. They're going to find things that, we all of us are guilty of it, right? Even myself, even Carrie, right? Where you get on that track and you just keep going and you let everything else just fall off to the side. But, I hope that the main takeaway that everybody got from today is there are other ways to do it. Yeah, maybe your way is working, but maybe there's something that's even better, right, than what you're doing today. And you could be extremely successful. There was one line that you said, Carrie, that really stuck out for me, which is some doctors are successful in spite of themselves. And, it is true. We're here to help you all make better financial decisions. Make sure that you have sleep at night. That's always the big thing, right? You can sleep at night. You have one less stressor. That's what really the point of tonight's webinar is.
Yes. Yes, let's all commit to better sleep in 2024. And the things that keep you up at night, let's work on those things. And if it's your lease, the good news is something can be done about that. So
exactly.
So yeah, I loved being here tonight. Were there any questions? I don't know that there were, but Shirley, did you see any questions come up?
Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you so much, Matt. That was just an invaluable presentation by both of you guys. So much great information and so encouraging. Yeah, we do have one question that's come in right now, and I think this came in during the time that Matt was speaking.
Yep.
Dr. Muhammad Budair, can you put Atlanta vacancy on the screen?
I sure can. Yeah, no problem.
Cool. Yeah, that was fascinating just to see how that is in the process.
That was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Absolutely. Let me pull that up here. Just bear with me 1 second, everyone. But yeah, I think that, for anybody that does have questions or is interested in speaking to us, we just have a quick little poll here as well that we'll pull up. If you're interested in speaking with myself, Carrie, my team, whomever, feel free. You can just click in here, or you can reach out to either one of us. Once I pop up the Atlanta market rates here, I will also pop up our contact details as well. But here, Dr. Budair, there's the Atlanta market overall. Now, I will say that as part of the complimentary lease consultation, alongside my team, we all take a very deep dive into not only the overall of Atlanta, but the submarkets as well, right? Not only what does your submarket look like, what does your specific building look like? What have the trends been in your building over the past 3, 5, 7, 10 years, right? So all of that can be discussed in much greater detail as well as we go through. But I'll just throw up our contact details here once more for everybody, so that if you do have any questions or want to reach out to Carrie or myself directly, we're happy to speak with each and every one of you.
Excellent. Wonderful. Unless, do you guys have any other questions that you'd like to ask each other? Oh, actually, I'm sorry. One did come in right now for Cirrus. From Dr. Desai, Kaushal Desai, financial options for commercial space buyout for dental practice.
Yeah,
I guess it's
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the buyout of this space, I'm not sure exactly if you're referring to if we're buying out the space from you're currently in a lease and you want to structure it in a way that it's a lease to own. Okay, for lenders. So depending on specific lenders, there's different requirements. Now, when you do own commercial property, as part of some of the lending requirements, they do need to ensure that, and it's treated differently because it is technically an investment property. There's revenue being generated from it. Another component of that is when you're looking at those financial options, look at, do you want to, not only from a financial option perspective, but also look at it from a personal perspective. Do you want to be a landlord? Because I hear many doctors that want to own their own property and they want to have a 3-4 tenant building. Now, the financing on that is completely different than your standalone property. That's just going to be your dental practice versus a 4-tenant location. But if you're going to go down that route, one of the most irritating scenarios that I've heard of personally was a doctor that I worked with about 3 years ago now that was standing in his waiting room saying goodbye to his patients when one of his tenants walked into his waiting room holding a plunger in his hand like this and going, "The toilet's clogged." Right. So, keeping in mind, he laughed about it at that point. Wasn't funny at the time when it first occurred. But, some of those things, when you're looking at those financial options for the space, it does depend. It also depends on the overall value of the property, right? What has it been before? What are some of the build out requirements going to need to be? Decide if you'd shoot me an email or give me a call. I can walk through that in a little bit more detail because it is situationally dependent.
Well, wonderful. That is all the time that we have this evening. I want to thank you again, Carrie and Matthew, for a wonderful presentation. And thank you all for joining us tonight. We did record tonight's webinar and we'll email the recording. We'll email it out sometime in the next week. We would appreciate your feedback via our survey that will pop up on your screens shortly. And I want to thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Have a wonderful evening.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you both. Be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.